Welcome to the final video of 2.3 quadratic functions. Here we will be discussing the discriminant, which is a part of the quadratic formula. So here we have our quadratic formula, which you've already taken notes on and watched part 4 of the video on. And this important part that's under the square root is called the discriminant. The discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. So it is a special part of the quadratic formula that's just b squared minus 4ac. It's what's under the root. Now, what does the discriminant tell us? The discriminant tells us about the solutions to our quadratic equation. It tells us how many solutions we have and their type, whether they're real or imaginary. So the discriminant tells us how many solutions we have and what type of solutions they are, whether they're real or imaginary. Okay, here is a graphic organizer that I found online, and I don't love this first line of it. Also, type 1, 2, and 3 is kind of unnecessary. In your notes, what I recommend doing are writing the value of the discriminant type or number and type of solutions, what it tells us, how many intercepts that means we have, because remember, solutions are the x-intercepts, and an example of the graph. So here, and here, this is telling us one situation is when our discriminant is positive. This is the situation that our discriminant equals 0. And this is the situation where our discriminant is negative. So here is what I would write in these 3 blocks instead of this kind of confusing looking thing. All right, I think writing just that the discriminant can be positive, 0, or negative is a much easier 3 things to look at. All right, so if our discriminant is a positive number, that means we'll have 2 real solutions, meaning our graph is going to literally hit the x-intercept 2 times. The solutions, aka x-intercepts, are real, and we can see them. If our discriminant's 0, we only have 1 real solution. Remember, we had an example like that where we had the solution -4. It occurred twice, but we really only had 1 distinct solution. That means our parabola will hit the x-axis but not cross it and keep going back up, or it might do the same thing in the negative manner, meaning it just hits the x-axis 1 time. It doesn't have 2 x-intercepts, only 1. And if our discriminant's negative, that means we had a negative under the square root. That means there's imaginary solutions, no real ones. That means we do not cross the x-axis at all, and our parabola lives way up here, or it might live down here, never hitting the x-axis. So our discriminant can be a positive number, 0, or a negative number, and depending on what type of number it is, it tells us how many and what type of solutions we have. Okay, we have an example here. We want to first find the discriminant and then classify the solutions based on what our discriminant is. So recall, the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. It's not solving the entire quadratic. We're only classifying the solutions, not actually finding them. All right, what we do have to do though is make sure that we're equal to 0 first. So I'm going to add 10 to both sides. So we'll have 9x squared minus 3x plus 2 equals 0. That allows us to find our a, b, and c. And so we want to find our discriminant, which is b squared minus 4ac. So plugging that in, we'll have -3 squared, which is positive 9, minus 4 times 9 times 2. This is a minus sign and there's no other negative, so there'll be a negative here. So I'll have 9 minus something. 4 times 9 is 36, and 36 times 2 is 72. And then 9 minus 72 is -63. So our discriminant, which we can abbreviate DISC, is -63. If we take a look at this graphic organizer, we can see that we have a negative discriminant, and that means we do not have any real solutions. Instead, we have 2 imaginary solutions. Our graph never hits the x-axis. So we would write that we have 2 imaginary solutions. This means we have 0 real solutions. They are imaginary. Let's take a look at what this graph looks like when we graph our quadratic equal to 0. We had this quadratic, and we can see that this parabola never hits the x-axis. So there are no real solutions because it never hits the x-axis. Instead, we have 2 imaginary solutions, which we will get more into imaginary numbers later into the year. All right, we have one more example here. Let's find the discriminant and classify the solutions one more time. So again, our first step is to get our quadratic equal to 0. So we'll have negative 2x squared minus 8x minus 8 equals 0. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out, actually, we don't need to factor anything out. We're not doing the whole quadratic formula. Let's just do a, b, and c as is. So we'll have a is negative 2, b is negative 8, and c is negative 8. We want to find the discriminant, which is b squared minus 4ac. So we'll square b, which will give us positive 64, minus 4 times negative 2 times negative 8. And so we'll have a 64, and then we have an odd number of negatives here. So a negative times a negative times a negative is a negative. We have 4 times 2, which is 8, times another 8, which is 64, which is 0. So our discriminant, abbreviated DISC, is 0. All right, as a reminder, when our discriminant is 0, that means we have one real solution. Our graph only hits the x-axis one time. It sits on the x-axis. So to classify our solutions, we would say that we have one real solution. We're saying how many we have, 1, and we're saying its type. It's a real number because it does exist. Our graph does hit the x-axis at a real value. All right, I've graphed our quadratic, and we can see that it does hit the x-axis and then just keeps going back down. So it never actually crosses it, because if it crossed, it would have to hit twice. It only hits once, and it actually looks like the solution is negative 2. I'm actually quite curious about that, and I'll look at the table. I'm going to type in, yep, we can see that our x-intercept is at negative 2. Anyway, that's a little extra. I wanted to just see how many solutions and double check that we only had one real solution, which we do. So in conclusion, our discriminant is b squared minus 4ac, and it tells us how many solutions we have and whether or not they're real or imaginary, number and type of solutions.